welcome to this spring director's lecture for the Westminster Abbey Institute. You can see that there is already a theme of optimism in thinking in the light of the weather that this is spring. I'm the chairman of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, and I'm also chairing this evening's event. It's great to see so many people, and we hope very much that this is an illuminating and enjoyable time. The format is that I am very shortly going to hand over to Claire to give her lecture. At the end of that, I've been invited to say a few words by way of response, and then there will be plenty of time for question and answer before we then leave here around about 7:30 or 7:45. So plenty of question and answer and plenty of interplay, hopefully. So I think probably, without more ado, I will hand over to Claire Gilbert for her lecture, The 7 Principles of Public Life, Words, 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 question mark.
Good evening. In the best tradition, I would like to begin with a story. Some of you may have heard me tell this story before. A farmer bought a cockerel to service his hens. He put the cockerel in the hen coop, but the cockerel found he could not do what was asked of him. He was a complete failure. The hens cackled and flapped at him and shooed him out of their coop, and there he was in the farmyard, utterly dejected, wandering around, feeling redundant and useless. And then he found himself drawn as if by a magnet to a field near the farmyard where the bull was doing to the cows what he had been supposed to be doing to the hens, successfully and clearly with great enjoyment. And this poor cockerel couldn't drag his eyes away. There he was, perched dejectedly at the edge of the field, watching, despite himself. And after what seemed like a very long time, the bull finished and came sauntering over and said to the cockerel, "Oh, you look a bit upset. Oh, what's wrong? What's the matter?" And the cockerel said, "I'm supposed to be doing to the hens what you've just been doing to the cows, and I can't." And the bull said, "I have a solution. You won't like it very much, but I promise you it works." And he said to the cockerel, "Every evening, for 3 evenings, just eat a little bit of my droppings." And the cockerel did look disgusted, and he said, "I know, it's not pleasant, but it works. You just have to take a little bit from around the edge, a bit of dry bit, for 3 evenings. And the cockerel thought, bleh, but he was desperate, so he tried, beginning with that evening. He tried a little bit of this droppings, and nothing happened. And then the second evening, he had a little bit of the droppings, and nothing happened. And the third evening, and he had a little bit of the droppings, and nothing happened. And then after a couple of hours, he could feel something change in him. He perked up, and he thought, "I can do this now." And in he went to the hen coop. He did what he was supposed to do, brooking no opposition. It took him till midnight, and he was so jubilant at his success that he flew to the top of the farmhouse and let out the loudest cock-a-doodle-doo in the world. And the farmer, woken from a deep sleep, found his gun, ran outside of the farmhouse, and shot the cockerel, who died. And the moral of the story is, if you get to the top through bullshit, don't crow about it. In 2007, James Martin predicted that the 21st century will see a gathering of crises as the planet warms, the seas rise, droughts and famines abound, human and creaturely habitats are destroyed, economies buckle, and pandemics roll over populations in relentless waves. He likened the stresses to a canyon through which we will have to pilot ourselves on small rafts, riding the rapids, keeping the rafts afloat, keeping ourselves alive, steering through the turbulence until we finally emerge on the other side. He said that the way we pilot ourselves through the canyon of stresses will determine who we are and what the world will be afterwards. Compassionate or dog eat dog. We can't just hope that compassion and good behavior will be there in us at the moment we enter the canyon. They need to be normalized, and that takes practice. In a few weeks' time, we will witness the coronation here at Westminster Abbey. The liturgy and music will be excellent. That excellence is not summoned for the moment at the hour of the coronation. It is practiced every single day here in our cycles of sung and spoken prayer. Prayer which takes place whether people come or not, every day. The 7 principles of public life will not stop bad things happening to us. Rather, they can inform the mode in which we approach them. But not if they remain as words on a page or in a code. Let's not crow about them. Like core muscles or the daily cycle of prayer, we have to activate the principles and live them, such that when crises hit and it feels as though there is no time to reflect or think, they will quite naturally guide and support our decisions and actions. So let us use our time this evening to address the 7 principles, not as words on a page or in a code, but as lively intentions within us, as muscles to be discovered and exercised. Let's think of our time together now as a kind of Pilates class for the soul. We will activate each of the principles in turn, beginning with selflessness. But before we start, let's spend a moment in preparation. Let's just put our feet on the floor, feel the weight of our bodies on the chair, be grounded. Take a deep breath. And another. And listen. Listen for a pin to drop. Selflessness. Selflessness means taking myself out of the picture, acting without reference to myself, without seeking to serve myself. Gladstone famously described the public square as that place into which no private interest should intrude. That is the aspiration of this principle, and it's a noble one. It isn't difficult to agree that public servants should be selfless. We value selflessness. In theory. What about in practice? Do I enact selflessness? Do I actually leave myself at the edge of the public square? Don't I regularly check in with myself, consulting my feelings about how I am doing, wondering if I agree with it, wondering if I'm due a pay rise or a promotion, whether my actions will help or hinder the pay rise or promotion? I might not be open to bribes, but am I discovering and welcoming other ways to gain financially from my position? seeking a well-paid role in the private sector that draws on my public service experience, accepting large sums for speaking engagements about my work in the public eye? Am I so badly paid that I agree to strike? Am I enticed by power, telling myself and meaning it that I seek power in order to be a more effective public servant, but not questioning its corrosive force? Do I love the status my public office affords me, the feeling of being important and needed and respected and taken seriously? Do I take time to ensure I'm feeling all right, that I have what I need, that I'm getting enough sleep, I'm fed, watered, rested, warm enough, not cramping at the computer, breathing properly, taking regular breaks? Any or all of these thoughts may have occurred to me, and it wouldn't be surprising if they had. There is a gap between the noble aspiration of selflessness and the person I actually am. Do the contradictions and impossibilities of being selfless mean we ditch the principle? This would be the thinking of a lazy mind looking too quickly for answers. Patient intelligence is needed, and an open mind and heart to address the gap between the aspirational and the actual. And as becomes obvious when we look at what we do that is not selfless, the work is not necessarily to close the gap. Some of those not selfless actions are really necessary. To see the gap between selflessness and self-care is to see how excess selflessness is an occupational hazard in vocational roles. It is common among public servants of every kind that the vocational pull of our work has us regularly ignoring our own needs, working silly hours because the job demands it, the people need it, and no one else is going to pick up the slack if we don't. It's frighteningly easy to get this wrong. As the work imperative takes over, I become tired, I lose perspective, and worst of all, I jettison the very things I need to keep me stable and well, because I need more time for my work, and they seem, in my unclear, tired perception, to be selfish, dispensable. But they aren't. They're vitally important, not only to my own health, but to the quality of the decisions I make at work. The gap between selflessness and financial gain is in some ways straightforward. Thank heavens, we have a government administration which is not endemically corrupt. We do not accept that bribes can be taken for favors. We do not accept that public servants, neither politicians nor any others, will live in luxury at the people's expense. On the contrary. But what then is a reasonable salary for public service? It is a scandal that the goodwill of vocational work is so relied upon to keep our public services going, borne by frontline staff more than anyone. And what about the financial gains from public office? The large payments for speeches, the commissioned articles and books, the lucrative board memberships? These are important questions, some of them not at all straightforward, and they're discovered in the gap between the aspiration of selflessness and the practice of financial gain. The gap between selflessness and power also contains tricky questions. The gaining and retaining of power squats at the heart of a democracy, a necessary presence, corrosive by its nature. In seeking election, I am seeking power, the power to operate as a democratically elected representative of my constituents. My party will seek to win a majority, to be empowered to form a government, because it is only when we are in government that we can effect the changes for which we became MPs in the first place. As a civil servant, my power is in my influence behind the scenes, arguably all the more potent because it is hidden. I need it to serve the minister. For the uniformed services, power is invested in me in order to keep the peace at home or abroad, power conferred by the warrant card or the weapon. Power is necessary, but power is corrosive, and it works its wily ways on me, especially when I have it for good purposes, because I am less awake to what it might be doing to my soul. If it is not watched, it becomes addictive. The moral muscle of selflessness is exercised by the work made evident in the gap between the ideal and the practical. We have, in practice, to find the balance between work and play, between action and rest. We have to understand the good uses of power and also its temptations. We have to understand what is acceptable financial reward and also its corrupting excess. Being selfless requires lively, intelligent reflection and action. Integrity. Integrity, it means as one. It signifies a person whose beliefs, words, and actions are in tune with each other. Of course, the beliefs, words, and actions might all be in tune with evil. But even assuming the values are good, it is rare indeed to live one's life so. There are my internal inconsistencies, my propensity to change my mind, and my failure to live up to my own ideals. Then there is the fact that I have to live and work with other people, which constantly threatens to pull my integrity out of shape. As a politician, my loyalty is owed to my own integrity and conscience, of course, but also to my constituents. Furthermore, it is owed to my local party, my parliamentary party, my party leader, my allies amongst MPs and others who have supported me from selection to election in the chamber of the House of Commons and in the causes I espouse. Where in that plethora of loyalties does my integrity sit? What happens if I am too fixated on acting according to my conscience, protecting my own integrity, but threatening the unity of my political party, on whom I depend for my seat and my ability to serve? As a civil servant, my integrity can be threatened by being required to enact a policy with which I disagree. This comes with the territory, and those who become civil servants usually understand it well. Democracy itself is a value for a civil servant, so there is no loss of integrity, even if it feels uncomfortable, in obeying the will of the democratically elected minister. But I cannot simply suppress my discomfort. My obedience should not be blind. I am appointed not by my political masters, but on merit, to be a custodian of propriety as well as a servant of politicians. Remember the conference at Wannsee in 1942, brilliantly depicted in the film Conspiracy. It was a gathering of officials to organize the final solution. If you had not known what the goal was, you would not have heard much, if anything, that gave you pause for thought. New transport facilities, railway tracks and timetables, new buildings erected around the country, rehousing. The conference could have been about levelling up. Those sitting around the table were the equivalent of us, a Home Office official pointed out to me, and the government whose policies they were enacting was democratically elected. So there is a gap between integrity and its enactment, and the work of bringing the aspiration into practice is, once more, not simply to close the gap, but to inspect what is going on in there and find a balanced response. We are inconsistent beings, and we do change our minds, and thank heavens for that. The one who is morally certain is incapable of responding to changing circumstances and needs. And that rigidity militates against working with others, which we are all obliged to do all the time. For public servants, other people are the point. They will persistently tug at our integrity, and we should let them and take a view. Objectivity. Objectivity calls us to see clearly and to make impartial judgments. But who among us can claim ever to have done that? There is no such thing as a view from nowhere. Each of us is standing in a unique place occupied by no other, from which we can see only so much, looking through eyes that are guided by myriad influences, responding with minds and hearts that are taught by culture, by our genes, by the company we keep, and 1,000 other factors. The Enlightenment has bequeathed us scientific method, a way of demonstrating truth through empirical means, not depending upon human argument and logic, not depending upon the so-called superstitious truth claims made by religion. But as we now know, even the seemingly objective approaches are determined by the partiality of those who enact them. We have scientific method, but what are the research questions we employ it to answer? Which are the results we see and believe, and which do we miss because we're not looking for them? We have technological power born of science, but what are the uses to which it is put? And our Enlightenment mindset has come at a cost. As the world was reduced to an object to be measured and harnessed and ultimately profoundly harmed, so humans were too. We became the servants of the machine, treated like machines ourselves in order to keep the lines of productivity moving. Even our morality reflected this reduction to numbers. Jeremy Bentham's 19th century utilitarianism recommended that we make our moral decisions mathematically. Count up the number of people whose happiness is increased by your action and those whose happiness is decreased. More people happy, action good. More people sad, action bad. If you can count, you can't be wrong. That is not how we actually make moral decisions, and nor should it be. And we are increasingly alarmed by the harm our objectifying selves have wrought on the planet and each other. Our certainty, born of science, is wobbling, and we are not sure how to find our balance again. One BBC director told me of the challenge of employees newly encouraged to bring their whole selves to work in the face of the requirement to be an impartial broadcaster, a challenge all too familiar to civil servants. The BBC director could see the need to temper impartiality with empathy, but it isn't easy. Objectivity is highly desirable, but not unthinkingly so. It should not reduce us to machine slaves. As Oscar Wilde said, it is only about things that do not interest one that one can give a really unbiased opinion, and this is no doubt the reason why an unbiased opinion is always valueless. How are the moral muscles doing? Let's reground ourselves for a moment. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel the weight of your body on the chair. Breathe. Listen. Accountability. Accountability is giving account of my actions and taking responsibility for them. What, however, if a project in which I have been involved turns out to be really toxic and a public inquiry takes place to find out what happened and who is to blame? Say my part in it was so small or so dictated by the circumstances of the time that I do not feel accountable? What if the atmosphere around the inquiry is so full of recrimination that I am too fearful to raise my hand to my own culpability when I cannot see others doing so and I do not believe my own action will make them? Will I become the scapegoat? And as we realize the harm we have collectively, and often with the best of intentions, done to the planet, where is accountability now? What do we do with it in any case? Confess to faults that were never intended? What difference would it make when we are caught in systemic practices which seem impossible to change? The gap here between the principle of accountability and our practice is full of the pain of denial and resistance. But to close it by simply stepping forward oneself, admitting liability, and taking blame that is not only mine, doesn't work. Accountability is a shared response reflecting our deep interdependence, and systemic change, institutional, cultural change, needs all of us acknowledging and expressing our accountability together. We have to work on this shared response, even when we don't know what to do with it, especially because we don't know what to do. We should not underestimate the power of penitence. Feeling truly sorry and helpless softens our hearts and opens them to new possibilities. We have deeply realized that we got it wrong with issues such as fossil fuel emissions and that we need help. Our certainty is made porous by our sorrow, and we will listen to the wisdom of hitherto unheard voices, and our imaginations may open themselves to completely new ways of being with each other, ways that harm neither us nor our planet home. Openness, transparency. What we do in our public service roles is on show, all of it. There are no protecting walls around our work or our WhatsApp messages. But I am vulnerable. Openness does what it says, leaves me open for inspection, criticism, misunderstanding, and for politicians, the pitiless gaze of the always awake media feeding a public hungry for salacious stories. It is one thing to be amongst friends whom I trust in a safe, protected space. It is quite another to be open to the cold wind that blows from the watching stranger. No matter how honorable my motives, my actions may be misconstrued. It is simply not true that if I have done nothing wrong, I have nothing to fear. Nor should we be open all the time. There are important psychological reasons for protective carapaces. And just as individuals need to protect themselves from external harm, so do many of the conversations which take place in order to rule and run the country. Sometimes, paradoxically, openness to the other requires a protective opacity around it. In the gap that sits between the principle of openness and my understandable practice of self-protection, I can find a strong motivation for improving my decision-making skills. If I decide carefully and well, I can be more confident in my judgment and feel more willing to be open about it. Thinking about a problem from goal-based, duty-based, and rights-based moral perspectives will do this. An action is not made right only by the desirability of its goal. The duty to act in accordance with moral principles, such as telling the truth and doing no harm, also matters, and so do the rights of refusal of those most affected by the action. Making decisions in this integrated way means I have thought properly and well about them, and I can more confidently show my workings to others. Honesty. Tell the truth. It's as simple as that. But do I? And do I want others to? I have come to believe that we should never, ever fear the truth. But it can hurt. It requires a degree of maturity which I don't always want to display. Oscar Wilde said, "If you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you." It's a commonplace and lazy observation that politicians lie, one which we have made since politicians were invented in ancient Greece. But have we noticed that we want them to? Suppose in the lead up to a general election, one of your local candidates came to your door to ask for your vote and made this case. If my party wins the election, we will try to achieve A, B, and a bit of C. We probably won't, because 90% of a government's time is taken up with crisis management of unforeseen circumstances. But we will try very hard. And your life may improve as a result. That is certainly our intention. Thank you. And now the next candidate knocks on your door and declares, you should vote for my party because if we win, we will do A, B, all of C, and D. Your life will improve. Vote for me. Which one would you vote for? No party has tested the former, more honest approach. It is unlikely it would win votes. The electorate is like the proverbial goldfish in a round bowl, forgetting what happened 5 years ago, forgetting that promises can never be wholly kept. We are like infants wanting the politicians to make everything right and then blaming them later when they don't. What sits in the gap between the principle of honesty and my practice or lack of it? Fear, mostly. All too often, I am afraid of the consequences of telling the truth. But fear should never motivate my deliberate actions. If I am avoiding the truth through fear, then I need to look at my circumstances. Why am I afraid? Work to make yourself fearless, and you may find that truth itself flourishes. Finally, leadership. Leaders act to make things happen and take responsibility for what actually happens. All too often we don't. In the gap between leadership and its absence lies the feeling of powerlessness, which is strangely prevalent in public service. The feeling that no matter what I do, things won't change, that our economic systems and our noble ancient institutions and our greedy human natures have default settings and will always revert to them. Again, there is fertile ground here for exploration and discovery. Here is a suggestion to pique our interest and have us thinking differently about power and leadership. In a radical move, Jesus teaches his disciples by kneeling down and washing their feet. I came not to be served, but to serve, he says. Go thou and do likewise. What does it mean to wash each other's feet? To clean the dustiest part of a person with one's own hands, to refresh, to tend, to restore, to take responsibility for the care of another, to kneel before them in order to fulfill that responsibility and not to look away. It takes the greatest courage to receive and enact that kind of vulnerable, tender power. And this is where I should like us to start and me to finish. We are approaching the canyon of stresses, and we don't want to find ourselves crowing uselessly in the middle of the small, buffeted rafts. We want to help ensure that the world we and our children inherit as we pilot our way through is a compassionate one. Our moral muscle needs to be exercised, and the gaps between the aspiration of the 7 principles and our practice show us where the workout is to be done. Let's try now not just to think about that muscle, but to feel it. If you can bear to, turn to the person sitting next to you and look. Look at your neighbour. Dare to look into their eyes and dare to receive their gaze. Look with compassion. Look with the promise to keep seeing the other, to care for the other, to remember the other, as we navigate our rafts towards the turbulent waters. Thank you.
I think what Claire said this evening is very characteristic of the service that the Westminster Abbey Institute has been giving under her leadership for the last 10 years nearly, helping us to consider not just the practicalities and the rules, but to think about the moral content of public service. And we're all in Claire's debt for the thought that she has put into this and the way in which she has delivered it this evening. The principles of public life were first articulated by Lord Nolan in his seminal report over 25 years ago. And in articulating those principles, he has created a set of principles which actually have had remarkable longevity. When I was a governor in a local comprehensive school, the 7 principles of public life were drawn to my attention. If you look at the ministerial code, owned and published each time we changed prime ministers, the 7 principles of public life are there. So those principles, I think, have proved their worth. But as Claire has reminded us, we need to reflect on them, and we need to allow them to affect the way that we respond to the challenges of public life. And it's not simple. It is a complex and a subtle process. I'm also conscious that there are challenges to the approach that Lord Nolan articulated and which Claire helped us to reflect on this evening. I think there are 3 principal challenges to the validity of the process that we've been considering. The first is to say, I will answer to my constituents. I don't need some unelected do-gooders telling me how to do it. If my constituents don't like me, they will kick me out, which you could say is a very democratic response. Or you could feel that there is more to democracy than majoritarianism. But it's a reasonable challenge. The second challenge is to say this is all fine and very kind of interesting bit of intellectual debate and a way of filling up the sort of space between work and dinner on a Monday night. But what we need is rules and laws so that we can work out exactly what we are allowed to do and what we are not allowed to do, and then we'll know where we're heading, and let's not get too bogged down in all this other stuff, because we are busy people and we have enough to do. And of course we do need rules and we do need laws, but I think many of us would feel that those do not completely fill the space which public standards deals with, and we need reflection and we need care. And I guess the third challenge is, well, this is all fine, but there are many challenges that we face as a country. There's an awful lot that needs to be done. We have many things that we need to deliver for this country if it's to succeed. And if we cut the odd corner here and there, if we concentrate on getting things done rather than worrying too much about the niceties of it, perhaps that's the best way to do it. My constituents, my managers, my colleagues aren't too fussed about the detail. What they want to see is results. And again, there's some validity in that. although I have yet to see the evidence that suggests that delivery is best done whilst ignoring the rules and by cutting the corners. Nevertheless, the model that Claire has been talking about and has done, I think, with such care and thought and not inconsiderable humour, does have its challenges. In our latest Committee of Standards in Public Life reports, we took this theme that we need more than merely rules, and we talked to a lot of people in the public sector, in the private sector, in the charity sector, and said, how do you go about creating an environment which helps people to adhere to ethical standards and to the principles of public life? And we published a report a month or so ago called Leading in Practice, which addressed those. And this is entirely in accord with the approach that Lord Nolan himself laid down, who recognised that the principles are important, but there need to be rules, there need to be codes, and also there needs to be education and reflection. And I think this evening is part of that process. So that is all I was going to say from my perspective. So now it's your turn, and we are going to have plenty of time, I hope, for some questions. So please, if you would like to say something, I believe there are some microphones floating around, and if when the microphone comes to you, you could give your name and what role, if any, you are in at the moment, and then I'm sure that Claire will be delighted to respond. So who would like to lead off with a question? There's a person here with a scarf, and if we can get a microphone.
David Harvey, I'm a city councillor and I look after charities in trouble. In a funny sort of way, you missed a third person on the platform, and that was Martin Wolf, the economist and philosopher. And when he launched his book about the crisis of democratic capitalism a few weeks ago, he said some of the same things from a different angle. And in a sense, this audience here is easy. They all take this on board. But unless this sort of framework can be taken into workplaces, places that are incredibly tough, and where there is space, into academia, where there are so many issues, into the public and private sector, we're just comfortable here. How do you take this incredibly difficult work further?
That's yours to answer, isn't it? Come on, Jonathan. Chair of the committee.
That's not meant to be the deal. I think you're very right in pointing that out, and it is, something that we do reflect on. What we did with the Leading in Practice report was not to say, look, here's a model. If you want to know how to show culture change, then go and talk to, Deloitte or somebody, and they'll charge you £1 million and, guarantee that it'll be absolutely tickety-boo by Christmas. But what we tried to do was to talk to people who are doing this in reality, and we have taken it beyond that. And we've been very encouraged as a committee by the response that we've had, for instance, from the chairs of public bodies, the Association of Chief Executives, the permanent secretaries, the people who are the National Health Service guardians, the non-executive directors in government departments. All of those have said, good, come and talk to us about this. So they are the people who are running the organisations that are at the cutting edge of this. And it is very noticeable, and I won't go on about this for great length because we're here to hear Claire, not me. It's really interesting that if you look at some of the examples that we saw when we took evidence, some of the most serious investment in this is in corporations. And they're not doing it because, they want to be fluffy. They are doing it because they see this as actually a really good way to retain, motivate their staff, get the right to operate as a company, and to deliver most effectively. So that, I think, in itself is a very interesting perspective. I'll get off the stage.
Maybe Westminster Abbey Institute should extend its reach.
Lady here with her hand up, if we can get a microphone there. Thank you.
Sue Cooper, I'm a charity volunteer. You referred to the example of Jesus and in connection with leadership and the role of service. But I wonder about is there room for other principles from Jesus of love and mercy, care and compassion?
Yes.
Jen, there's a hand here. Can't see who's attached to it, but there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Carolyn Roberts. I'm head teacher of Thomas Tallis School in Greenwich, and was for 4 years the chair of the Ethical Leadership Commission, run by the Association of School and College Leaders and other leadership organisations within schools, and we put together the framework for ethical leadership in education. Exercising the moral muscle is very important, and it's very important, obviously, in schools for us to do that, to act as a role model, as well as fulfilling our roles as public servants. But it becomes increasingly difficult when the shortcuts, which are a response to catastrophic recruitment and retention issues within schools, make it less likely that school leaders following on, much younger than me, will have the range of choices that they can exercise their moral muscles on. When curriculum is centralised, when all training is centralised, when the majority of secondary schools are run directly from the Department for Education, the chance of leaders on the ground being able to develop and inspire serious ethical thought has retreated. What's the best way to make sure that when fewer decisions are yours to make, that you are making the right ones?
Yes, the feeling of powerlessness it's corrosive, and the power is corrosive. Powerlessness is too. Well, you have to start where you are, and you mustn't give up, and you certainly mustn't compromise standards. The thing about these principles is that they need to happen. They need to be. We need to live them, do them, not just say them. And if there isn't time for a session reflecting on ethical leadership, there is the chance to set an example in your own actions, and to give people the chance to ask questions if they need to, if they're concerned about something, to create an environment in which it's all right to raise questions if one's concerned. You just have to start where you are and not give up. Don't let them get you down, grind you down.
Gentleman here at the front.
This lady's had her hand up a couple of times.
Thank you. My name's Rose Cowley. I'm a civil servant in the Ministry of Justice, and I think this builds on from the previous question. As individuals who want to, build that moral muscle, have Pilates classes, how do you yourselves find that time to do reflective practice? How do you build that into people's work days? How do you build that into your own daily life?
Good question, and I want to reiterate what I said before, that when you're tired and you're overworked, those sorts of things like time for reflection tend to get jettisoned because you think, I just haven't got time for that. This is a bit of a theme. It is relevant to what you said. And all I can say is, from my own experience, make time. Make time. It shouldn't be an option. You're not a machine. You must look after your soul, yourself. You must. And your community. In whatever way it's possible to do that, but make time. It's one of our hardest areas of work in the Institute, particularly with MPs, because they find this nearly impossible. There's a good feeling behind that, so that my time is not my own. Of course I can't spend time navel-gazing when I've got to answer all these emails and see all these people and be in the chamber and attend these events. And there's always such a call on the MP's diary that the thought of spending an hour, not just dropping in, but actually an hour sitting quietly, working in some reflective way, coming to quiet, talking about the stuff that's troubling you at quite a deep level, it's really, really difficult. But we have worked away and worked away and worked away. And some of them are beginning to. And then you have a couple of sessions and you think, this is doing me good. One of them said to me, I go back to my office and my researcher says, you're always so much better when you come away from that session than you were before. And if I just say from my own experience, I had a really nasty shock a few weeks ago when I mean, it wasn't a breakdown, but I lost it. I met a spectacularly unpleasant woman in a buggy, who I now regard as an angel, because she was so horrible to me. She made me cry, and I didn't stop crying for 6 hours. She unlocked something in me, and I was in a real state, and I paid attention to myself, and realized that the previous month I had jettisoned all my stabilizers, which for me is a time of contemplative prayer, very first thing in the morning, horse riding, Alexander technique lessons and singing lessons. None of them had happened in a month because I was so busy, and it showed. And I will never do that again.
Down here in the front row.
My name is Sean Moore, and my claim to fame is that I am Claire's husband. And Claire, thank you very much for such an authoritative speech from the heart. And I observe that there was very little coughing. That's always an accolade. Could I just ask simply, was there something that prompted the Nolan principles to be formulated? Was there some crisis? They hadn't appeared before in anyone else's remit, so what's the reason for them? Thank you.
Cash for questions. That's right, isn't it? Those brown envelopes, some of us will remember, in the 90s. And the committee was formed in response to that. Do you know more detail than that?
John Major invited Lord Nolan and his committee to look at the whole question of standards, and I think it's quite interesting to see how they did it, because there was no public consultation or evidence taking or any of that nonsense, as it were, in those days. They just sort of put their heads together, wrote them down, said, these are the principles, there you go. So that was how it was done. But they have been remarkably tenacious since then.
Nick Henderson, retired clergyman, still working. Thank you very much for this. Here we are at the heart of the religious establishment, the heart of the political establishment, listening to an exposition of these 7 principles, which twice now, Lord Evans, you've said have served us well. They started in most unfavourable circumstances, and they haven't served us well. You know that. And it feels this evening as though we're thrashing around in a vacuum. And just over the road, very few of these principles are being followed. And I think we need to address this. There are a lot of people here this evening who are movers and shakers. Certainly a very intelligent, well-educated audience. And I hope that the Institute has some more robust outreach than simply speaking to us nicely this evening.
Well, the Institute does a lot of work behind the scenes. This is the public exposition of what we are, how we work, and what we're concerned about. but it does a lot of work behind the scenes too. I wouldn't too quickly dismiss a whole community of people as unethical and not attending to the principles. I think that's lazy thinking. Go and talk to them and see if that's still what you think when you've met a few. But thank you.
There's a person this side. Yes, that's it.
Thank you. Angela Harvey. My question is about the responsibility of everybody else in the public space and how we, as private individuals, or possibly members of the press, how we engage with the contemplation of the principles of public service and how we can support them in our private lives as well.
Sorry, be clear who you're talking about?
Well, your lecture is about the publicly held principles of service, but in the public square we all engage, and it's a question of how, as private individuals, we can support those principles that we expect people in the public's eye to deliver. So we can engage ourselves, I include us as private individuals, but also perhaps the press and other influencers.
Yes. This report, which Jonathan's committee has just brought out, and there are copies of it at the back, which you can take away with you if you would like to. They do talk to other groups than just the obvious sets of public servants. And I should say that the Institute interprets public service very broadly. So, for example, we certainly include journalism as a public service, and medicine, law, teaching, academia, science, the arts. But I think you're also making a point about our private behaviour, perhaps. Yes? Yeah. How to support the principles privately. You mean by living?
Sorry, I didn't mean to engage in a dialogue. It's the point about personal responsibility for those who are not in public life. It's about how people personally can support the principles in public life.
By living them?
By the way they engage and support people in public life as well. You know, they do not attack where there is no cause for attack, but support where there is,
yes.
You know, because it's tough.
Thank you. That's a really, really important point to make, that we have the privilege of living in a democracy, and it's really, really hard. Democracy is hard work, and it's hard work for the people who have the courage to stand and be counted. And the more we get at them, the less likely they are to continue to come forward. Researchers and special advisors of politicians often say to me, there's no way I would become an MP. It's not worth it. They see what the people they work for have to go through. We do need to be careful that we don't criticize away our democracy because no one will come forward to be a member of Parliament. So yes, I couldn't agree more that the need to support those who have the courage to be public servants is that matters. It matters that we do that. If we want a democracy, if we want public servants to be honourable, we need to believe that they can be and not keep thinking that they aren't, because in the end they'll say, well, no one thinks we are, so why should we bother? Let's make corruption endemic.
We are suddenly getting lots of hands up. I was about to say we have 2 further hands, but there are more hands than that. There are 5 or 6, and we're going to run out of time. What I'm going to do, in the time-honoured way, is to do a little bit of grouping. So if I could ask the lady, I can't remember, there is a hand just at the back there, if we could ask that person. And then on the other side, close to the back, there is also a hand. So we'll take those 2 questions.
Thank you. Amanda Spielman, and I'm the Chief Inspector at Ofsted. Thank you for a very interesting talk. Actually, Lord Evans, I recently heard you make some very interesting remarks at the Institute for Government conference, which I've discussed with my own staff recently. The Nolan principles are tremendously valuable and important. I think the point that you made about the corrosiveness of power, even and perhaps especially when it's held for a good purpose, is one that will particularly stick with me. I do want to make a point, though, that I thought in a number of places you perhaps lost sight of the importance of recognising that there are many different moral values and mixes of moral values in a population. And books like The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt do a wonderful job of reminding us that equally moral people can have very different sets of moral values. And one of the great dangers, I think, in public service is giving excessive weight to one's own set and failing to recognise that we are not ourselves the democratically elected individuals, but that we have to respect the entire population we are there to serve. So I think there are places where it is quite easy for us to creep into thinking the right thing to do is simply to bring what we want to our jobs. And I think there's a risk in that.
I really hope I didn't give that impression, and I'm very sorry if I did. I couldn't agree more, and thank you for saying that.
Hi, Dr. Gilbert. My name is Akshay Suresh, and I'm a student in the program for leadership and character at Wake Forest University of the United States. I was just wondering, based on your background in medical ethics and the Westminster Abbey's Christian Foundation, I was wondering, what role do you think faith plays in medical ethics, and how can we mediate problems between patients and providers when there's a clear conflict of interest between treatment and religion?
Goodness me, that's a whole other lecture. And a very good question indeed, thank you. Oh gosh, a few thoughts. If a patient is a person of faith, that has to be respected because that's part of who they are and understood. And that's not just a question of finding some kind of lowest common denominator that doesn't honour any faith because it's trying not to offend any faith, but to really recognise and understand people's needs and why their choices might be what they are. Because what a patient wants for their reasons may not at all be what the doctor thinks is best for them. That's why respecting autonomy is such an important principle in medical ethics. And in that very brief unpacking of how a moral decision is made, goal-based, duty-based, right-based, was an attempt to do justice to that, actually also to the point made just earlier. And we have to listen to the people who are most affected by our actions and not assume we know what's best for them. It's a long lecture. I think that's probably all I'm going to be able to say this evening, but we're meeting tomorrow, so we can continue the conversation then. Thank you.
Now, we've got a few hands up, and I'm going to ask people to very, very quickly, and most of the think at the front here, so we can take a couple of points, and then I will invite Claire to respond. So if we can come up to the front, could you put your hands up high so people can see? That's it. Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis D'Souza. Do you have any expectation that social media will eventually develop its own Nolan principles and adhere to them?
And then we'll take one more, and then that will be it.
Thank you. Hi, Claire. I'm Alison. I'm from the House of Commons. I'm one of the fellows on the Institute programme. My question is on fallibility, which is probably quite sensible because it was my phone that went off earlier, so I'm really sorry. I wanted to ask what happens if... I know we've spoken about this privately, and I wanted to ask publicly your thoughts on when you're a public servant and you fall short. You don't, through whatever reason, publicly or privately, you don't live up to the 7 principles of public life, and how you move forward in that respect, because we're only human. And I think I think a lot of public servants put a lot of pride on those standards that we set ourselves in public life and in our private life. Thank you. I'm sorry again.
Yes. So social media, no, I don't think it will. What we have to do is prepare ourselves to be strong as we use social media. We can try and regulate it, but the better thing is to regulate ourselves and our children. so that we have the strength, for example, not to allow our attention to be pulled in 15 different directions at once, to notice if preferences are being ratcheted up to turn into something that ends up being highly polarized and highly individualized and informed by only one set of opinions. We have to attend to ourselves in relation to social media. That's my view. On fallibility, thank you. Making mistakes, failing, is a really important part of what it is to become a mature, responsive, sensitive leader in public life. It will happen. It feels terrible at the time, but you must learn to forgive yourself, find a way to make amends, and journey on with that wound, if you like. It makes a wound in you, and the wound makes you open and porous to others, and more able to listen to others, much less judgmental, because you know that you've found the fallibility in yourself, so why would you judge it in others? It makes you a much, much better person.
I do apologise that there are many questions still in the audience, but I think we had better draw to a close. I'm going to make one observation from my perspective. One of our biggest enemies is cynicism. We must not believe that most people in public service are doing it for other than the right reasons, because certainly in my experience, the great majority of people in public service, political, civil servants, police officers, they're doing it because they have a moral purpose, and that's something that we should be working towards. Thank you very much indeed for your attention this evening. Claire, thank you for a fantastic talk and great answers, and I will invite us to give one final round of applause before Anthony says farewell.